Round 4 of Norway Chess took place today with Sergei Karjakin in the lead with 3 out of 3. Just behind him, Anand and Aronian with 2 out of 3. Today, Karjakin faced Aronian with the black pieces, and we joined the game after 17 moves. It's a very complex situation. You can see there have been no piece exchanges, only one set of pawns exchanged. Now, I'm joining the game here because actually this was exactly the same as the game that Karjakin played in round 2 against John Ludwig Hammer. Exactly the same position. So Aronian has done his homework. And here, well, let me remind you of what happened in that previous game. Hammer played queen to d3, then f6, driving away the knight, and rook e8. Now, black is very solid here. This knight is beautifully placed on e4, supported by the pawn on d5. And here Hammer took and played f3, driving the knight away. That's very understandable. You know, the only problem is once you play f3, then you can see this bishop on g2 isn't so good, but the second rank is weakened, and also potentially the king too. Doesn't seem significant at the moment, but well, it was later on in the game. And here also, white's knight on a4 doesn't make a very good impression. This knight is also at the side of the board, but somehow there's more for it to do. It's looking at b3 when it comes back here. It can also be usefully placed. But okay, in this game, now the bishop hits the pawn on a3. b4 was played, and I think knight c4 is an interesting move for black here, but Karjakin played knight c6. And after b5, knight e5 was quite a shot. Black gives up the knight, but this bishop is trapped, and after this exchange, well, material is even, but already Karjakin is doing very well here, because the action is taking place in the center, but also the king is now looking weaker once that dark squared bishop has been exchanged off. This pawn is a liability, and the knight is still stuck out on a4 while everything's taking place in the middle of the board. And Karjakin went on to win quite a long game, but black is definitely doing well in this position. So let's rewind to the 17th move. So queen d3 was played in the earlier game. Aronian improved with pawn takes pawn, and it's certainly an improvement if we take a look at what happens. Now, black would like to play bishop takes d5 to get this bishop into the game and blockade the pawn on d4. This looks very nice, but the problem is that once this knight is pushed away and rook e1, well, you can't really retreat this knight. That would be then on prise. So black has to play f5, and that's quite a concession because white has this knight on e5. So instead, after pawn takes, Karjakin just played pawn takes pawn. And now b4. The knight retreats to c6 and rook c1. And this is definitely better than the previous game. Pressure on c6. Now, if knight takes knight, then pawn takes knight, and there's a chance to blockade here. Maybe you can bring your bishop round here and get some control, and then this knight will re-enter the game, maybe via c3, maybe via b2. So understandably, Karjakin played rook c8 to defend the knight. And now we see Aronian's idea. He has bishop h3, attacking the rook. Now, black would very much like to play rook c7 here, just to hold everything. But there's a tactical problem. White can take on f7. Okay, this gets taken. Now bishop takes rook. And the point is that b5 picks up material. Because of the pin, there's also bishop e6 in the air as well. So after bishop h3 hitting the rook, black has to block this with f5. And this is a concession, because now this knight can't be driven away by the pawn, so white has a foothold in the centre of the board. I think white's only problem here is this knight on a4, still the knight on a4. If this can re-enter the game, then white will be doing very well. So, for example, if you could hop this round to d3 and exchange on c6 and plonk this on e5, white is doing well. So what happens if white plays knight b2 here? You know, that's white's only really bad piece. Well, the problem is that black will now play g5, and after this exchange and bishop e5, which still looks very nice for white, then bishop b5 is a strong move. Hitting the rook moves, and now knight c3 hits the queen, and then there'll be knight e2 check winning material. So for tactical reasons, it's not possible to bring the knight back into play straight away. So Aronian played f3. Okay, there's this move from the previous game that I really wasn't sure about, but I think it's necessary here, and I think not bad. So the knight goes to d6. Now this is a good square. White has control of e5. Black, on the other hand, has the potential to put the knight into this hole on c4. So I feel that black is probably just about holding the balance, but it's very, very complicated. Now again, I would like to return the knight on the wing into the centre of the board with knight b2, but I feel that black should be okay after this exchange, and then knight into c4, and well, probably we're going to arrive at an equal endgame here. But instead Aronian played queen d3, and I don't think that's a bad move. I think that's okay. Karjakin exchanged. Well, again, that's to do with getting this knight into the hole on c4. But here I think Aronian overplayed his hand. I think he should have just played bishop e5, so keeping that nice square. Now the knight shouldn't really jump in here straight away because f5 is on prise. So let's say g6, and then the knight comes back to b2 to cover that square. Now the queen is blocking the ideal square for the knight, but you know, one day it could arrive there. I feel the position is still in the balance, still very double-edged. I feel that both sides have reasonable play. This bishop is very strong, but this knight can possibly come into c4 at some time. And, well, yeah, very balanced, well, double-edged position. Both sides have chances. But instead, Aronian played pawn takes knight, and, well, we're about to see this comes unstuck badly. Karjakin exchanged and played the knight into c4. So this hits the pawn on e5. Now f4 to protect that pawn. And here, I don't know whether Aronian underestimated this move. b5. The knight would like to go into c5, but then after this exchange, d4. And this is very dangerous indeed. You can see the bishop cutting across white's king. And of course, you know, we would like to play queen d5 to set up mating threats there. There's also an idea to play bishop e4 in this position to drive away the queen and then push the d pawn. And if bishop g2, then we exchange and queen d5, and this also looks very good for black. You can see this knight dominates the bishop on c1. So Aronian played knight c3, but now a check. The rook has to block. The king can't move into the corner because of this, and the diagonal opens. So rook f2, but this already looks rather ugly, having to block with the rook. You know, you're self-pinning, which isn't very pleasant. d4, black's initiative just flows. You know, the moves play themselves. So knight e2 and now rook d8. There's a simple threat here, and that is bishop to e4, driving the queen away, and then the pawn just gets pushed down the board. If bishop g2, then we're going to play bishop e4 anyway, and after this exchange, the pawn just drives home. If bishop takes f5, then queen c6, and it's already over. So Aronian played queen takes f5, but this is still absolutely lost. It's actually quite simple for black. d3 threatens the knight, but also threatens d2. And there's no decent defense here. You can see how tied up white is. The rook can't move because of the pin. This bishop here is a dreadful piece, dominated by the knight on c4. This bishop isn't really in the game. The only piece that's attacking is the queen on f5, but, well, black actually can defend this position quite easily. So the king came to f8. Now, if white goes in for the endgame, so the knight's on prise, knight c3, well, we play d2 and win a piece. Now, in this position, white has 3 pawns for a piece. Sometimes that can be good enough, but here, black's initiative continues. Knight e4 is a very awkward move, because if rook f1, then bishop a6, and if a4, then you just take this pawn, and now it's only 2 pawns, and that bishop comes into the game, and white's king is still in trouble. And if rook c2, then black just wins by checking here, and it's a very nasty discovered check. You can see that white has terrible problems once that f-pawn has advanced, because it weakens the long diagonal and the second rank. So after king f8, Aronian played queen f5 check, but the king just ran away, and white still has all these problems with the d-pawn and the diagonals towards the king. Okay, Aronian took on h7, but d2 is just winning, and after this exchange, well, you could check here and then try e6 to threaten queen f7 check, but there's a very simple move, knight d6, preventing the queen check, and white's king is still getting cut to bits here. So e6 played, but this is even simpler actually. Check. The bishop has to come back. Now queen takes pawn. Black is a piece up, and still with a devastating attack actually. White's checks are running out. Aronian tried knight c3, but queen c6 was a winning move here. Aronian resigned. There's no decent defense to queen h1 mate. Really convincing victory by Karjakin, who now leads with 100%. He has 4 out of 4. And Anand lost today against Nakamura. He overplayed his hand. So Karjakin has 4 out of 4. Nakamura is the next player with 2.5 out of 4, so a 1.5 point lead for Karjakin now. But in the next round, Karjakin faces Magnus Carlsen. Let's see if Carlsen can come back. He's only on 2 out of 4, but if Carlsen wins, then the tournament will still be wide open.